Ian podcast starts now. I'm Lee Navlin, and once again, I am joined by a man who needs an introduction.
Thank you, I do.
Yeah, Mr. Ian Grodman. Now, Ian, the reason I said you need an introduction is because last time we did a podcast, I said you did not need an introduction.
I do need an introduction.
Right, you were very clear about that. You said basically, Lee, you're going to have to introduce me on the podcast.
Who the hell is Ian Grodman?
Right, but I know who Ian Grodman is. I think everyone knows. You're a power broker. You're a man. You're a myth. You've been in politics for.
You've also referred to me as a legal scholar.
A legal
right?
scholar? That's right, yeah. So who doesn't know Ian Grodman? But apparently you were concerned about that, so here's your introduction.
Well, thank you.
Ian Grodman.
Thank you.
Well, Ian, thank you again for
here.
doing the podcast. And Ian, we have a very special guest
Yes, we
in-house this week. Okay, Ian, okay, now, we were talking about Black History Month, you and I, off the air. We said, God, we want to get somebody on our program to discuss Black History Month, maybe somebody who's really accomplished some great things in his life. And you know what? I said, I think we've got the right guy. So he's the first African-American mayor in the history of Maplewood. His name is Mr. Ken Pettis. Ken, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Ken Pettis.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lee. Ian, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So, Ken, you were the mayor of Maplewood back in 2008. Okay, right. You were in township committee for quite a few years before that.
5 years in total.
5 years. Let me ask you something. Now, when you first moved to Maplewood, did you know that there had never been an African-American mayor? Was that something that was even on you? Did that cross your mind when you decided to get into politics? Was there a reason? Were you concerned? Maybe I'm black. Maybe this would be a problem for me. Just a little background on what that was like. Your experience as getting into politics back in the day.
Well, when I first moved to Maplewood, which was 1988, excuse me, I didn't even know Maplewood existed. I just happened to end up here.
You were from Chicago originally.
Originally from Chicago. Went from Chicago to Connecticut for school, Rhode Island for school.
Brown University.
And then went to New York to work for about 8 years. Moved from there after getting married to Jersey City, New Jersey, stayed there for 2 years, and then ended up in Maplewood.
Right. So, very interesting. Real quick about Chicago. I don't know Chicago that well. I know the White Sox, the Cubs. You're a Cubs fan. There's the North Side, the South Side. What's
Everybody
your
knows
background with
Ken's a Cubs
Chicago?
fan.
Yeah, what's your background with Chicago? Were you North Side, South Side? And
Actually, I was born on the west side of Chicago.
Okay. I didn't even know that existed.
Born on the south side of Chicago.
Okay.
Ended up on the west side of Chicago. Cubs are a north side team, but I was a Cubs fan.
Okay.
So I was a little bit different in that respect.
So you were kind of in White Sox country a little bit.
I was definitely in White Sox country.
Okay. Yeah.
But I always went to followed the Cubs since I was like 7, 8 years old, and I'm still a Cubs fan,
Right,
even
so
though I've been on the East Coast forever.
You've been since I knew you, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and you like the Bears and all that? The Bears?
All
and,
Chicago teams.
Okay, the Blackhawks and whatnot.
Bulls.
Gotcha. So we haven't, the Bulls. I'm a Knicks fan. I don't even want to get it. I'm still mad at Jordan and that whole thing. But when you came to Maplewood, you were working in Manhattan. I know that, right? Because I used to see you on the train. And so you said, maybe I'll get involved in some local politics.
Well, it really started more with community service. The first time I actually got involved at all, and I'd never been involved in community service, civic action, or anything until I moved to Maplewood. And I lived in what's called the Hillcrest neighborhood. And Hillcrest, for those who don't know, actually, it's funny, when people would come visit me when I lived in Maplewood, they didn't realize they were in Maplewood. They all assumed that it was a part of Newark. But I lived over there, which at the time was fairly integrated neighborhood, but slowly being disintegrated, if you will. It was it was becoming an area that was becoming mostly black, and it was primarily because of the fact that there was steering going on, which I figured out after being there for a while and watching the neighborhood change over time.
And what year was this? This was
when we first moved in was 1988.
Okay. Oh, 1988. Okay. Right.
1988.
So that was you saw that. So basically, they were a black couple coming in, and here's a great neighborhood for you.
Exactly.
That type of thing.
Essentially, at that time, most of the black people who were moving in were being steered into Hillcrest and Hilton.
Right.
Those were the neighborhoods that we were being steered into. And
Did you know that was happening when you were looking at Maplewood, or you just
Not really. Like I said, I didn't know anything about Maplewood.
right? So you just
we
said, "Oh, this is a nice community, nice looking house."
yeah, we just happened. It just worked out that we ended up in Maplewood. I mean, we looked in Long Island, we looked in Westchester, we looked in Jersey City. Again, continued to look in Jersey City, but ultimately found a nice house in what it seemed to be a nice town, and ended up in Hillcrest. And in Hillcrest is defined by Irvington Avenue, Parker Avenue, Boyden Avenue. And what we were finding in that neighborhood, and it's also defined by 4 traffic lights. Those traffic lights are very strangely timed and placed, and we were getting a lot of traffic that was to avoid those lights. And I mean, cars and trucks were coming through the neighborhood like 40, 45, 50 miles an hour.
Right.
So I and one of my white neighbors, David Chavis, who's no longer in the area, decided to organize our neighborhood. And the first thing we did was we formed the Hillcrest Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
The Hillcrest Block Association. And then we expanded that to the Hillcrest Neighborhood Association, essentially taking in all of the streets that were bound by those streets that I mentioned. And we tried to figure out a way to increase the sense of community as well as to make the streets safer for the kids. There were a lot of kids in the neighborhood at that time. We took we studied the situation and looked at different ways that we might address specifically the traffic problem. And this is one of the most notorious incidents, I think, that has occurred in Maplewood. We went to the township committee, and we made a proposal of putting up gates on certain strategic blocks to keep traffic from flowing those streets. Essentially, there was no reason to come into the neighborhood unless that was your destination.
Right. There's no shortcuts. You wanted to basically eliminate the shortcuts.
Exactly. We were ultimately successful. At the time, Maplewood had a Republican government.
Okay.
Bob Grassmere, for some of the old timers,
So he was mayor at the time.
At the time
For a gazillion years.
for a gazillion years. I think at the time there may have been one Democratic member of the township committee at that time.
In 88, there may have been maybe Theo Bucklad.
Yes, that's right.
Yep.
And anyway, we took a proposal to the committee to do these gates. And to our pleasant surpriseness, it was accepted.
Okay.
And then the shit hit the fan.
What was it? What I remember this reading about this. I wasn't here yet, so I remember the gates being a big deal. Was that what the shit was? These gates? Who went crazy about them?
Who went crazy about them? The
National
mayor of Newark, Sharp
Okay.
James, went crazy over it. Sharp James at the time was under investigation for crimes that I don't remember exactly what they were.
There were a lot of them.
There were a lot of them. And he decided that in order to take some of the attention away from the issues that he was going on, he was going to create a new issue. And that issue was that Maplewood was putting up gates to keep out the black people in Newark, because one of our gates actually was right on the border of Newark on Irvington Avenue. Well, it started out small, and without going into all of the details, ultimately it ended up on the front page of the New York Post. It ended up in all of the wire services. I was hearing from people that I went to high school with who lived in Asia who were reading about this.
And your name was prominent, I guess, in these articles.
Well, it was interesting. My name wasn't prominent initially, but as it became more of supposedly a racial issue, it ultimately came out that one of the organizers of this was a black man.
Okay.
Actually, it was a black man and a Jewish man who had started this.
Yeah.
We ended up on the Phil Donahue show.
I never knew this, Ken. I've
I
known
didn't
you.
know that either.
You
Yeah,
didn't? You didn't?
no,
Yeah. We ended up on the Phil Donahue show, and one of the funny things, kind of funny things, David and I went representing Maplewood on that show. David was actually on stage. I was in the audience. And they had a monitor set up on stage where Sharp James showed up. We didn't know that Sharp James was going to be on the show.
Wow. Yeah.
And what was interesting was we get there, we get to the studio. They sent cars for us, and they take us to the studio. We're in the green room, and they have us in the green room with people who actually were doing things to try to maintain segregation in their neighborhoods. Segregation as opposed to what we were doing, which was essentially putting up these things to make our neighborhoods safe.
Protecting children. You were basically protecting children from not having a truck run them over while they're walking home from school.
So there was a big there was a number of different people in the green room, and we're all talking about our different experiences. And then they escort us out to the studio, and on the stage, there are chain link fences.
Yeah.
And they introduce Phil Donahue, and he walks out onto the stage, stands behind one of the fences with his hands up on the fence, looking through the fence, and says, "Hi, I'm your neighbor."
Yeah.
And that kind of set the tone.
So they put you in a room, which on the talk shows is common. I worked in talk shows many years ago. You try to rile people up a little bit in the back, in the green room. Maybe you even give them too much coffee, whatever it was. You want to get people jazzed up and a little angry. Gets you guys together and puts you on the stage, fence.
But you said you were in the audience?
I was in the audience.
Why weren't you on the stage?
I wasn't invited, strangely enough.
Yeah.
That might have messed with the narrative.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
That they were trying to create.
Yeah. You're like, "Hi, I'm Ken Pettis." Like, haha, very funny. Where's Ken Pettis? Right. Yeah.
So actually, I got the timeline screwed up a little bit. Because that occurred prior to the actual approval. Mayor Grassmere was on that show, actually, and he spoke positively about what we were attempting to do. And ultimately, like I said, it was approved. Once it was approved, there was actually the day of the vote at Town Hall. There were cameras. Like I've never seen before and never seen since.
No easy feat.
It's true.
In Town Hall,
we invite a lot of attention that way.
Yes.
And it was voted on, and it was approved, and that was pretty much the end of the story, except for shortly thereafter, I forget what the name of the magazine was, but I do remember that it was Forbes, one of the Forbes magazines, and it was kind of like Media Matters type of thing, where they followed the media and how they covered stories, et cetera. And they did a story about this whole thing ultimately. And they went back and covered a lot of interviewed a lot of the reporters who had been reporting on this. And essentially what the story came down to was all of these people said that they had covered this because there was nothing else to cover.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
Just happened to be like a slow news day.
As a matter of fact, what took us out of the headlines, and we were in the headlines for a couple of weeks, I'm trying to remember, there was a murder. I can't remember what it was, but it was a murder that happened, I think, in New York, that just took over the headlines.
Okay.
At the time, that's what knocked us out of the news.
Right. All of a sudden, the biggest crisis is gone and forever. So that's amazing. So Ken, so with that, now you've gotten your feet wet in politics a little bit, because that's a very political issue that you were successful in driving. So how do you end up running township committee? Kind of tell me a little bit about how that happened and becoming mayor and your experience as mayor.
As best as I can remember, that was, like I said, that was my first foray into civic life. But shortly thereafter, or not shortly, and then I started getting involved in a lot of other things. I was on the police. I got involved at the police advisory committee. I got involved a little bit with the schools, particularly in sports, coaching my kids and other kids in both soccer and softball. And ultimately, I was asked if I would be interested in being involved in this committee that was being formed, which at the time was called Committee to be Named Later, which ultimately became the Community Coalition on Race.
Oh, okay.
You were one of the founding
I was
members,
one of the
right?
founding trustees of the Community Coalition on Race, and which was a wonderful experience. That's when I really started to get into and understand of what was going on in the real estate markets in the two towns, and served on that actively, I would say for 10 to 15 years.
So it was like Audrey Rowe, Barbara Heisler, right? Names like that. Yep, working with these people.
And the folks also ultimately kind of the group merged with Friends and Neighbors, which was a similar situation, similar organization in South Orange. And I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do then. I'm very proud of the fact that the Community Coalition is still going strong. On the other hand, it's as much work as we've done, or they've done, I should say, at this point. There's still a lot of work to be done. That organization was actually named as one of George Bush's 1,000 Points of Light. I don't know if you remember.
The CCR?
Yes.
No idea. I had no
I
idea.
didn't know that either, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, are you paying attention? I know you're no longer living in the area. I mean, you live in the area. You're just across the border on East Orange now, where I live, by the way, as well. Ken and I are neighbors.
I live in Maplewood.
Ken's a very loud neighbor, by the way, Ian, just so you know. Yeah. Are you taking out your recycling? I mean, he's that type of guy.
He's very engaged in civic life still.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he is very, very engaged. There have been calls that CCR gets funded by South Orange, it gets funded by Maplewood.
Partially.
Will you partially? Yeah, very partially. Yes. Yeah, there are calls. People don't think that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Maybe they're long in the tooth. Maybe they should. Both of you guys, what are your thoughts on that? On the CCR, where they currently stand today? I know people would be interested in this. In
You
your
served
answers.
much longer, Ken. I'll let you go first. I only served 3 years as a trustee on the Community Coalition,
Okay.
so
Oh,
we'll let
okay.
Ken go first on this one.
Yep.
Well, again, as Ian said, I don't live in the town anymore, and I don't follow things as closely. I am on the mailing list for the coalition. I do go to some events, but like I said before, the coalition's work, as is stated, which is to promote integration, not just diversity, but integration in the community. The work is not done.
Right.
And so I think there's very much a place for the coalition and its work, and I support them in any way I can. So I mean, what you mentioned, Lee, about people saying, "Oh, well, it's really not doing anything." Well, it is doing. I can't even imagine where the towns would be if it were not for the coalition.
Okay.
But there's still work to be done. Some of the things that the coalition is trying to do, they're working against. Not just what they're working against is very much ideas and such that are ingrained in society as a whole, and therefore it's kind of difficult. It's very difficult to make changes in those ideas on a local level, because you got people coming in from all over the place still. And they're bringing with them their prejudices, their preconceived notions, and so
Which sometimes they don't even know that they have.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's always going to be a place for an organization with the goals that the coalition has.
Now, the CCR, I know one of the things, I guess maybe you might have been a voice on this, they said to the real estate brokers and sales agents in the neighborhood, like, hey, no more... Oh, black family, come here, look at this community right over here. White families, everything else, we'll show you the rest of that kind of disappeared in your time on the CCR, or was it still prevalent yesterday versus today?
I would imagine that it's a lot less prevalent today than it was back then. because of the fact, for a number of reasons. Number one, the CCR, and I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but they were doing, what's the word I'm looking for, Ian? They were having testers. They were sending out people. They were sending out people,
like actors, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
We're interested in a house and seeing where
that's right,
where they were led to.
and word got out that this was going on and that it was being policed. And certainly when I was involved, that practice fell off significantly.
Sure.
It's interesting. When I moved to Maplewood 29 years ago, my wife and I were looking at houses, and there was one house that we thought we wanted to look at on Hilton Avenue. And the realtor said, "You don't want to look at that house." And I was like, "Why not?" Because I knew what she was saying.
Right.
She's like, "You don't want to look at that house." She said, "You want to be in the Tuscan or the Jefferson School District." I said, "Well, what's wrong with the Clinton School District? What's wrong with the Seth Boyden School District?" She's like, "Oh, I'm like, "No, I don't know. Please explain to me. Like, I need to understand why you're telling me I shouldn't be there." And she's like, I'm like, I don't know. But I couldn't get an answer out of her as much as I tried, but it was still going on 29 years.
Yeah, right. She's doing like the wink and nod type of. Yeah. So that's incredible because when I moved to Maplewood, I knew that there was still kind of the Hilton District, which was predominantly black, and the rest of the community was predominantly white. In my time, I've seen that change. I've seen a lot of white families moving to the Hilton District. Okay, now obviously there's more black people living in Maplewood and South Orange as there should be, but real estate prices are very high right now. So I don't know. Is Maplewood going backwards a little bit, and is that South going backwards? Are we losing African American families because of the value of the properties today? Is that possible? Is that something the CCR could focus on? And
well, to some extent, my understanding, and we started this when I was on there. The way that they're addressing it is that they make funding available for families to make it more affordable.
Okay.
And I can't get into the details of it because, like I said, I haven't.
It's been a few years.
That I've been involved. But I believe that there are still similar programs where, on an income basis, they will provide grants or low interest rate loans to people. And just because of the nature of our economy, those just happen to become more available to people of color. That's just the way our economy is right now. Which again, I think is a good thing. I've heard people that have a problem with that, assuming that it's all race based, and it's not. It's economic. It's economic.
Yep.
So like I said, there's work that can be done. The CCR, through research, has come up with some good ideas of how to address that specific issue as well as other ones. Getting the community to talk. One of the things that the Community Coalition did a lot, and I believe still does, is hosts forums where people can come in and talk about, why do I have a different perception than my neighbors do of certain issues?
Okay.
And hopefully get people to understand where other groups are coming from. And that's, talking is always a good thing.
Talking is always a good thing, and the Community Coalition has been fantastic at that, getting people to sit down and talk to each other in a comfortable and safe place. Even recently, I've served one term on the Community Coalition board. Currently, I'm working with the Community Board on Police, and I even just worked with Audrey and Nancy recently on a program to advise police.
That's
on
Nancy
certain
Adams?
Ways. No, Nancy Gagne.
Nancy Gagne. Okay, my apologies.
Certain ways to talk to police, right? And how police can speak to constituents, right?
Sure.
And even other members of the police department, because our police department is much more diverse now than it's ever been.
Much more than when I was on.
And so this is something that's going on all the time, and the coalition takes the lead on these things all the time.
Right. So there's plenty of value that the CCR brings to the community for those. Why are they getting funding? Because I read the social media sites and look, everyone's going to complain about everyone's complaining about something. So that kind of clears, I think, the air on what CCR is doing, what they've done, and what they're capable of doing moving forward. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's still very strong leadership there.
Absolutely, very strong leadership. Audrey Rowe just retired. I don't know if you know that.
Yes,
Ken.
I was aware of that.
You know, Audrey was there from the beginning, and it's a tremendous loss. But it was time. You know, she wanted to retire and spend some more time on the road with her daughter. So that's very
SZA,
exciting,
right? And
Yep.
yeah, well, that's what I would be doing too. If
Yes.
my son were SZA,
There we
I
go.
would be sitting here with you two. That's for sure.
right.
Doing
No,
this podcast
I
right
wouldn't
now.
be either. Yeah,
That's right. I'd be on the road
Yep.
somewhere with a big cigar in my mouth.
There we
right?
go.
Yeah, right. Enjoying it. But so, Ken, that for those of you listening to the podcast who weren't around in the mid 2000s, there were 6 big names in Maplewood politics. Those names were Fred Perfetta, Vic DeLuca, Ken Pettis, Kathy Leventhal, the late Jerry Ryan, and of course Ian Grodman.
Who?
That would be you. That would be you. I have to introduce you. I have to introduce yourself to yourself now.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank
right.
you.
Yes.
I know who I am.
So that was a big 6. That really was a big 6. And there are 5 committee spots, 6 big names, 1 mayor. It seemed like every year you guys were kind of like with bats in your hand, kind of going after each other. So
That's still happening.
I'm sure. So Ken, who did you run with originally? You know, did you? Because usually it's like you don't usually. Well, you know.
Did you run with Kathy? Yeah.
So it was Pettis and Leventhal originally.
Yes, Kathy and I actually ran against each other in the primary, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Ran against each other.
I
Yes,
ran against Kathy on a primary once too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
would that have?
I ran with Fred the first time. Well, both times.
No, you ran with Fred.
Right.
I ran with Kathy the first time and Kathy the second time.
Did you guys run against each other?
We never ran against each other. We worked together.
Right, you worked together, right, yeah. But every year, so Leventhal was there for a decade. You know, she was,
Yes, 9
you know,
years.
and I tell you, Kathy, if you're listening,
12.
my apologies to Kathy Leventhal. I used to give her a hard time when she was on the township committee because I always felt that she should be mayor at one point, and it seemed like everybody else was kind of getting a shot at it. Perfetta and Vic, my whole impression of Kathy changed. So the Yankees were in the World Series, and I was at St. James Gate, okay, and we were watching the game, and the place was packed, and a seat opened up at the bar, and I'm like, oh, there's a seat. And I'm thinking maybe I'll grab it. Kathy, like Lawrence Taylor from the other side of the bar, is knocking guys over and flipping guys upside down. I swear, and gets that seat.
Kathy knows how to get things done.
Gets that seat. And I just remember, slams her head on the bar, and Jimmy the bartender, I'll take another beer, and I was a Kathy Leventhal fan from that moment on.
Kathy's still very involved in the Democratic Party locally, very involved in leading our Get Out the Vote efforts. We call it GOTV,
Yes.
led by Kathy Leventhal and Becky Shear.
That's excellent. So Kathy's still very much involved, and Vic obviously is still very much involved. Ian, you're still obviously very much involved. Now, Fred Perfetta, he's still doing his thing too, right?
Fred is still a Maplewood Democratic Committee district leader. Fred has recently started the Maplewood Foundation, which is funded through his own funds.
Yep.
They provide a lot of money every year to local nonprofits.
Yeah,
and
guys,
that's his focus right
Yeah, and he
now.
born in Maplewood, Fred. Been here his whole life. I think he graduated #1 from
I think
his
he moved
class.
here when he was 2 years old.
Yeah, 2 years old.
Yeah.
But I think he 1 or 2 from, he might have been the
Went to
valedictorian.
Columbia High School,
Yeah.
Yale undergrad, Harvard Law School.
Yeah, we're lucky to have him. So Ken, with all these, so you become mayor. I mean, we got Leventhal, we got Perfetta, we got Grodman. You become mayor. When did you find out you were the first African-American mayor of Maplewood? Did that ever cross your mind? Because I'm very curious about this, because I think it's a big deal. I think it's a real big deal.
It's a big deal.
I never saw it as a real big deal. I'm trying to remember how I came about even running for mayor or running for township committee, because as you obviously know, the mayor is chosen by the members of the township committee. But I forget who reached out to me initially to run. It may have been Ellen Davenport.
Okay.
Who reached out to me and suggested.
By the way,
that I
Big
run.
7, Ellen Davenport.
Don't forget David Humer, the big 8.
David Humer, the
Yes.
Big 8. That's right. That's right. Yeah, the list grows. Yeah, I ran, by the way, too, for township. So the
Lee
one
Maveline,
thing,
the big 9.
right? The one thing the three of us haven't is I've voted for both of you. You guys never voted for me. So let's clear the air on that. But
It's
in
true.
any case,
Apologies for that.
that's okay. I had no chance.
But people asked me, once I was in, or even when I was running initially, why would you want to do this? And I always had the same answer. It's because I live here.
Right.
And once I got it, stuck my toe into civic life and saw what could be done by people who wanted to get things done and change things where it was appropriate. I just figured that nobody's going to do it better than me, honestly.
Good. Yeah.
And so that's why I ran for the township committee. As far as being mayor, I was voted after my third year. My third year? No, after my fourth year, I was voted to be the mayor.
So you ran for township committee twice.
I ran for township
committee 3 years,
twice.
and then you ran again. Yeah.
I have the honor of having actually beaten Vic DeLuca.
That's right. Yeah.
Kathy and I beat Vic, and do you remember?
Jerry?
Was it?
And Jerry Ryan.
Yeah, that was a very contested election,
Very
right? That
contested
was in the middle of the revow and all that was going on right at the time.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Vic ultimately got back on the township committee, and I served with him while I was on there. It was rocky at times, just being on the township committee as well as being the mayor. I'm really hesitant to go into a whole lot of details of what made it so rocky. But
first of life, you're raising a family, you got a job. I mean, this is still volunteer work. Sometimes people forget that.
People do forget that. I don't know if it's changed much. I doubt that it's changed much. But township committee members get all of $3,500 a year.
I think it's up to $4,000.
Is it up to $4,000 a year?
Right. So
which probably works out to 35 cents an hour.
Right, exactly.
Right. It's the difference between Budweiser and Heineken, basically.
But it was rocky at times, but not in ways that you wouldn't expect. In that, for instance, as I mentioned to you earlier, there were a couple of pretty big deals that occurred during my time on the township committee. One of them was the placement of the police station.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Now, the police station was where there's a building now right by the train station. There's an apartment building.
Donnell Road.
Donnell Road. It was a very old station. It was in need of
major
work.
Major work. Yeah.
And there was a lot of debate as to whether to leave it there and leave it the location there and do a new police station, to renovate the existing station, or to move it to Springfield Avenue. I was against moving it to Springfield Avenue. And it was very contentious debate on the township committee about that at the time.
I know Fred wanted it over on Springfield Avenue.
Absolutely.
What were your thoughts on that?
I ended up voting for it to be on Springfield Avenue.
Springfield Avenue. Yeah. And Vic, I don't remember where Vic stood on that. Vic, you know what? Actually, I remember Vic's, when the police station was going down, and it was a very costly situation. I think Vic made a joke that he goes, "That was my year of, when I was on leave." That might have been the year that he was out of absence. Right, when Ken had knocked him out for a year. So I do remember him laughing. Vic had said something like a news record, something to that extent. Very funny, but he was already back. But in retrospect, you like where the station is now? Was it the right move? I know
the primary argument that was being made, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, but the primary argument that was being made was that it would be closer to the area where there were spikes in crime at the time.
So I remember my decisions were made for two main reasons, right? That how would we operate the old police department if we fixed it up in the location that it was in previously? And also, it was seen as a way to help spur further development on Springfield Avenue, right? And Springfield Avenue at that time was not quite as thriving as it is now.
Not even close.
Right. And so that was a big part of the decision for me.
Yeah, and on Springfield Avenue now there are businesses, there are restaurants, there's shopping here. Newark Way around the corner.
We're in this beautiful studio in Springfield.
That's right. We're in a beautiful studio in Springfield Avenue. So I think we share the courts now with South Orange. I don't know if that alleviates costs. I'm not sure.
Not
I don't know
much, but it does a little bit.
But it does. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that was a third thing, but we can get to that in a minute. I don't disagree with what Ian was saying about the consideration of potentially helping Springfield Avenue at the time to thrive more than it was. It was going in the right direction even then,
Right.
but it wasn't where it is now.
Right.
But my argument was that police is not a dispatch service.
Right.
I.e., having the police station on Springfield Avenue
Right.
wasn't going to make it any safer. It's not like if there was
lot
a
of
crime,
discussion about that.
you
Yes.
were going to send
Cops
out a
are on the
police.
road,
They're
and they're-
already on
Yep.
the road,
And they're right. They're not just sitting in the parking lot at the police station waiting.
waiting for something. Exactly.
Yeah.
And also another argument that was being made was that you couldn't do development, any kind of development on the old area of the police station because it was in a flood zone. Well, guess what?
Got a
There's a
beautiful
there's a
apartment building there now.
development there now.
Right.
Also, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, and another thing that really bothered me was that moving the police station kind of took away from the original design of the town. That was a civic square.
Okay.
You had the train station, you had the library, you had the police station, you had the fire department.
Right.
And so you were taking out
A middle school was there too.
a school
right?
was there,
Yep.
and that was all around the park.
Right.
And I felt that moving the police station really kind of took away from that original concept of the town.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah.
But anyway, I lost that argument, and which so it's fine, fine by me. Some of my colleagues never forgave me for taking that position.
I can only guess who.
Which is one of the reasons I think that fed into the events that led up to my ultimately resigning from the township committee,
Right.
and resigning my mayorship at the time.
Yeah.
Another issue that came up, which is a perennial issue,
Yeah.
here in Maplewood, was artificial turf fields.
Yes. It's still.
20 years later.
20 years later is
Yeah.
still
Right. Yeah.
an you would think an unresolved issue. I mean, given the number of times that the public has spoken about that, I would have thought that it would have been resolved by now.
So, what were your thoughts? Were you pro? Were you anti-turf?
I was anti-turf.
You were anti. Now, today, I mean, people talk the turf. It could cause cancer with kids. And there's all sorts of. I don't know if any of it's true or not, or the injuries are 9 times more likely. I always read different statistics of different facts based on whatever person is spewing them. Yeah, I don't know what to believe or not. Why? What was your issue with turf then? And
Well, the health concerns were among them. Though, like you said, you could read any number of things that would argue both sides of it. I would, one of the things that tilted it towards me from saying, well, why take the risk, is just kind of watching sports on TV and watching the black stuff going up into the air as people are sliding on it, and
Right.
and it's got to be going into your system.
yeah, what is that?
It has to be
Right.
going. Well, we
Yeah.
know what it is.
Yeah.
It's crumb rubber,
Right.
and usually made from tires.
Okay.
And the tires are not just rubber; it's rubber and chemicals.
Yeah.
So anyway, on the health side, there was that. I also felt that we could, if properly maintained, we could properly maintain our grass fields. There was a we attempted that. I forget. This may have been during my tenure or shortly after. We attempted to maintain the fields at DeHart. However,
Still an issue.
there was no oversight on the construction.
Yep.
And as a result, the fields ended up being worse than they were initially.
Right.
But that's because nobody, from my understanding, as I recall, nobody actually watched the contracting as it was going on to make sure that the field was being done the way it was supposed to be done. Mm-hmm. And so that gave more ammunition to the pro-turf people. But like I said, it's not. The people have. I don't know how many votes there have been on this now, but we had one.
Several.
We had one when I was on the township committee, and it was resoundingly defeated. And it's been defeated every single time it's been brought up
It
again.
went to a referendum in the town as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 20 years later, the turf.
It went to a referendum and was defeated. The
Yeah.
town voted no to turf fields.
Yeah.
So, okay, and that was when? That was last
That was
couple
fairly
years?
Within
recently.
the last 5 years.
Right, so that's where it stands
Yep.
now. So it may never happen
Right.
at this point. Yeah. So
There's still people pushing for it.
yeah. So Ken, I think we'll move into some other topics we want to discuss. But I just want you to know, you are in the history of Maple my second favorite mayor in the history of Maple.
First
Nancy
grass
Adams
mayor?
Nancy Adams being number one because if I didn't say this, Nancy she threatened to pull the plug on this podcast. She said, "I will shut you down, Navelin, Grodman." Right. So anyway, I just want to get that out there. Okay, Nancy, Ian.
All the mayors are my favorite.
That's right. But no, Ken, I've known you for years, and I love you. You're a great friend of mine, and I'm proud of the fact that you were mayor, and I hope you're as proud
Yes.
of the fact that you
am.
did some great things.
should be.
I was unaware that you've been on Phil Donahue too, so I mean now even more reason to like you.
And when Ken and I were on the township committee for a few years, overlapping, Ken was always the one I had to call to ask to explain to me the statutes that had to do with finances because I could not understand them very often. And,
Yeah.
and he always provided me with great guidance. So,
Did he clarify it or did he make it worse?
no, he clarified it. No, he
Because sometimes I'll
was-
talk to Ken, I'll sit there, I'll nod my head like I know what he's talking about.
was
I'll be like,
very-
I'll say to my wife, I go, "Did you?" She's like, "Yeah, I don't understand him either." But no, I'm joking.
he was
but,
a very valuable resource.
But
to
Ken
me,
now
so.
in the community we live in, Ken's very much in the board of the. You're still
yeah,
you're still
sure.
in politics. You're still in politics on a smaller scale, but
Co-op
and
board
and
is
for
a rough
and for
one.
the same reason, because I live there, but I don't know. People ask me which is harder, township committee or co-op board, and it's close.
Is it really?
It's
Co-op boards are
very,
tough.
very close.
Yeah.
You're dealing with people, ultimately, and you might say, right, hey, I've got a great idea, and everyone else thinks it's a great idea, and then that one person's just going to be like, no, not interested.
Yeah, it's a little bit. There's some differences. I mean, my fellow co-op board members are now much more entrenched, if you will,
Yeah. Okay.
than the folks I served with on the township committee.
And maybe it was fluid. It was
Yeah.
like I said, there was 6 big names, but then we expanded it to 8 names. And there was,
8.5.
Lewis Lester Powder wasn't he on the township
was on the
committee?
town-
That's
so now we're
9.
9.5.
Nancy Adams was
10.5.
was running here and there. I mean, right. So there was a lot of names. Davenport, Ellen Davenport, and then of course you have all the district leaders that perhaps want to. So anyway, but yeah, no, hey man, that was a nice run you had. You should be very.
I am proud of it, and people have asked me also, would you do it again? I'm
Yeah.
still thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer.
Let me ask you something. With shared services, right now the fire department is
That was
shared.
another big one.
Right, that was another
Always
big
talked
thing.
about. Yep.
Yeah, because we were talking about the courts kind of shared now. What did you think the fire department was ever going to happen?
department now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
Did
that
you
took
think?
years.
Yeah. Has that been, Ian, in your mind? Has that been successful? That share is it saving money for the taxpayer? Is it department?
That was another one of the big ones while I was on the township committee that I did not necessarily make any friends because there was an actual proposal to merge the two towns.
The two towns.
I remember that. Yep.
And I was vehemently
South
opposed.
Mountain Village.
I was vehemently opposed to that.
I was opposed to that as well.
But there were members of the township committee who were vehemently in favor of it.
Well, I remember I went to a township
vocal
committee
minority.
meeting, and I proposed because they were talking about what the South,
South Mountain Village.
yeah, and then someone had said it was Maple. No, someone had said Southwood as a name, and so I had said Maple Orange. So everyone told me to sit down, but yeah, but I thought Maple Orange. We're gonna go something ridiculous, but were you thinking about? Was that something that was in your wheelhouse? Thinking the town should merge?
As I said, I was vehemently opposed to it.
Opposed to it, okay.
And the reason that I was vehemently opposed to it was because if you looked at the numbers, Maplewood residents, which were the ones that I represented, would have come out with on the short end of the stick.
Okay.
And for that reason alone, I just said no.
Yeah.
And it would have taken quite some time, if at all, before it would have evened out. But from the beginning, Maplewood would have been taking on a larger share of the combined costs than residents of South Orange would.
I mean, that's always been an issue, right? And there's always been an issue in terms of who bears the burden for the schools, right? And although Maplewood and South Orange have been separate towns now for about 100 years, it's only a couple of years ago that the two towns had a revow in the same year specifically for that purpose, was to make sure that there was a fair distribution of who was picking up the cost for the schools.
Oh, very, very interesting. Yeah. So, but it's off the table, right? They're not talking about ever merging again, right?
I'm not hearing anything about it. Nope.
Yeah, how would that even work? Okay, so let's say Maplewood and South Orange, the township committees, they vote, we want to merge.
Let's go to the state.
It's got to go to the state. That's a big. Governor's got to sign off on something like
We've
that.
got to get
right?
somebody in the legislature to sponsor legislation for the two towns to join. It's got to be approved by the entire state legislature and signed off on by the governor.
Wow. Yeah. So that would have been a lot of work for you, Ken.
I've never been afraid of a lot of work. I just didn't think it was a good idea.
Right. Yeah. No. I concur. Councilor Grodman.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's a.
The legal scholar.
Ken, let's talk. You're a very astute guy. You know politics, obviously. The world today, Donald Trump today. Ian, what were we talking about a little earlier? We were talking about DEI a little bit earlier.
Well, we were just talking about the Joint Chiefs of Staff being fired on Friday night, right? Like a Friday night special, right?
Yeah.
And, in my opinion, it's very obvious why he was fired. This administration is making a big deal about diversity, equity, and inclusion hires.
Right.
They
don't like them.
They don't like them, and they suggest that the people who are being hired with that philosophy in mind are not qualified to do the jobs, which is completely opposite.
Right? And with no evidence that many of these people were hired on the basis of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are equating. They're equating that any person of color who's in a position of power was put there because they happen to be a person of color.
That's right. What he is, not who he is.
Yeah, as opposed to their qualifications.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you have any doubt about that, look at just who these people are replacing, who they're being replaced with.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in no instance can you point to an example where the person who has replaced that person has higher qualifications.
Yeah.
Well, the person that Trump wants to replace the Joint Chiefs of Staff with doesn't even have the qualifications that are required by law.
By law. Yeah, he just likes the guy. Or,
Right.
Yeah, or he watched him on television, like the defense secretary. Or
like, when are you getting your appointment, Lee?
Yeah, I did right. I worked in television too. I mean,
there we go.
Former
Fox
And
News
the right network.
That's right.
I just
He's
stuck
disavowed
around.
that. He's disavowed that.
I've tried to, but people, you know what? Bottom line is, I'm not at Fox News anymore because I stood up and I said, I don't like what you're doing. They said, get the fuck out, Naplet. So just for the record, that's how my career at Fox News ended. It did end because I was happy there. It ended because I was quite the shit stirrer, so to speak. Yeah, so
You still are.
Well, you know what?
I'm proud of it.
I pride myself in stirring the pot. That's why, remember the Maplewood Online days?
Strawberry.
That's right, strawberry. Straw that stirs a drink. That's right, yeah. So.
I never knew where that came from.
Yeah, well, actually, where it came from? It came from my favorite ball player of all time. Was Darryl
thought.
Strawberry.
Right.
That's where the name came.
Yep.
My first name, but I forgot the password, was actually Jackson for Reggie Jackson. I forgot the password, so I was like, well, okay, my second favorite player is Darryl. So that's kind of right. That's kind of how it happened. So if I lost that one, then my name might have been Keith. Keith Hernandez was my third favorite ball player at the time. So, Ken, DEI, what do you think?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because when you say DEI, it doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, and it's an easy way to vilify people.
Yeah.
Let people who are against that say that they are against diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's important. Language is important.
Right, you're right. Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Yeah, so you put the onus on them. What's your problem with diversity?
That's right.
I don't like it. Why?
Right.
And then you find out who you're talking to.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think? Where do you think we're going with this, Ken? With Trump? Wait, how do you see the next 4 years?
Frankly, I'm hoping it's going to be less than 4 years.
Okay.
I'm seeing signs that there are cracks, albeit minor cracks at this point, in the Republican Do-Nothing Party, where they're actually kind of realizing what they've done to themselves.
Yep.
And over the last week or so, you're starting to see a lot of town halls now that Congress is on.
Yep.
That Congress is on
Recess.
recess, and representatives are having town halls, and they're in the Republican districts. Their constituents are making it known they're not happy with what's going on.
Right, yeah.
And hopefully that's going to give Congress some backbone to be able to stand up against some of the most obvious
Just horrendous. It is a
decisions
constitutional crisis.
that
Yeah.
are being made. I am firmly in the opinion that we are in the midst of a coup right now. And I wish that the media would call it what it is.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, at least, that's clearly what's going on here. There's an attempt to completely disassemble government,
Yeah.
and frankly, to change our form of government. And if that's not a coup, I don't know what is.
Certainly is.
Especially, I mean, Trump got 49.5% of the vote.
Yep.
However, as far as actual citizenships, he got, I think the number is 23%
Right.
of the adult population
Right.
voted for him.
Yeah.
And so, there is no mandate in place here for
There's no mandate
anything.
at all.
No
No.
mandate
Yep.
by any way you put it. And people are coming to terms with the fact that he's doing things that, in my opinion, the vast majority of Americans do not want.
Now, Ian and I, we talked about this on one of our previous podcasts, and I had said I feel that the Democratic Party right now on a national level is kind of without leadership, certainly without younger leadership. You mentioned quite a few names.
Sure.
Well, you said that may not necessarily be the case. Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, for instance.
Jasmine
Our senators
Crockett.
here in New Jersey.
Crockett, yeah, but is it time for Pelosi and is it time for Schumer and is everyone just sick of these? They're talking, like it's like watching the paint dry, trying to get information from these guys. Are they lost? Is that the problem with the Democratic Party right now? Why Trump just seems to be, like a fullback with a football knocking everybody over, and like Kathy Leventhal at the St. James State.
Who is a Democrat, by the way.
Right. But everybody, nobody seems to be able to rein them in yet. What's next?
I think James Carville just yesterday or day before yesterday said something interesting. He said Democrats just stand back and let the Republicans implode, which they seem, if you believe the polling, if you believe what you're seeing as far as what's going on with these town hall meetings that I mentioned, if they're not imploding now, there's certainly a good case can be made that they're on the verge of imploding.
Yeah.
And just let them do it. They can't get anything done in Congress without the Democrats.
Right.
And if the Democrats just sit back, who else can be blamed for whatever comes out of it other than the Republican Party?
You just wonder how far.
I tend to think that also the Republican Party is much more organized and in lockstep, right? And the Democratic Party is the opposite, right? We are the big tent party.
Yeah.
We include a lot of people in our party. People are coming from all different directions. Trump had this very well planned where he came into office and every day there are more executive orders that are just horrendous and obscene.
Yeah.
And I think the Democratic Party right now is just overwhelmed with trying to get the party base organized to fight these. And that's what needs to be done. And that's a difficult thing to do. I think the party is working towards it. I think, as Ken pointed out, we're seeing people are being much more responsive. People are calling Congress. People are calling the Senate every day. People have got to make their voices heard, because if people don't speak up about these problems, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, and
So
Ken,
I think it's a combination.
yeah, and I know you were a guy with a background in finance. You were in that world for many years. Doge, what are your thoughts here on
Jesus
me and
Christ.
both of you?
I think that one of the best things that could have happened for the Democrats was getting Elon Musk involved in Trump policies.
I agree.
I've said to people before, just because you have a lot of money doesn't make you smart.
Right.
He has no clue of what he's doing and how it's actually impacting the country. And I think that the that the public as a whole is got a better grasp on what he's doing than he does. Trump, I've always felt that Trump actually has no idea of what's going on around him at any time. I think that he's got certain advisors that, say, this is going to make you look good, sign here, and he signs, having no idea what he's signing or what the implications are. And having Elon Musk as the face of all of this is
troubling.
It's troubling, but it's also, like I said, it could be a good thing because people do not like Musk, and his approvals are totally in the tank.
Right. So
I mean, you've got a small group of tech bros who just absolutely love Elon Musk, and they're very vocal about it. But when you look at the polling numbers, as Ken pointed out, people are like, why is this man in this role? Why does this man have all of this access to my personal information?
Yeah.
What is going on there? It's time for him to go. And you can see, like when you talk about the cracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trump is like starting to see that Musk is a detriment to him.
Yeah. See, I was listening to one of the guys this weekend, and they were talking about they think if Trump really stumbles and he's falling, like a rock, just crashing to the earth, and without a safety net, and Musk is a disaster. That it's J.D. Vance is the guy whose career is going to be destroyed because he's attached at the hip to Trump right now. So when does he break away from Musk? When does he start going? So maybe
I don't see Vance falling away. He wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Musk and Thiel.
That's right.
He wouldn't. He's stuck. He can't go anywhere.
So
I don't think
he's not a guy who's going to start waving.
No.
Hey, but
You can't bite the hand that feeds you.
no.
It's got to be Congress. It has to be Congress that does it. And I think that there's, like I said, minor cracks at this point, but those cracks
They're getting bigger.
could be getting bigger.
Yeah, some interesting times, some scary times, but and I went into this whole thing with Trump. I was like, hey, look, maybe he'll come in. He's got experience now. He's just going to want to run this thing like a business. But
government is not a business.
Government is not a business. Yeah.
Government is here to provide services to the people who live in this country. Yeah. Government is here, in my opinion, to give a hand up to people who need assistance. And that's what our government is for, and that's not a profit-making venture.
No, it's not to cut costs so that you can give it to the guy who's cutting the costs for his space program.
And remember, Trump wasn't a very good businessman, regardless.
Yeah.
6 bankruptcies.
Yeah.
Including a casino, which are...
2 casinos.
Every casino I've ever been to, I walked out a little lighter in the pocket.
And any money that Trump has is related to him not paying the contractors who worked on all of these buildings. He's put... literally hundreds of small businesses out of business.
Yeah, Trump University. Remember that one?
Yeah.
It was. We'll teach you how to do nothing and take your money for doing it. Right? Yeah. So
Trump Steaks,
Trump Airlines. That's right. Yeah. That's our president, Donald Trump. So Ian and Ken, this has been great. We're about an hour in. We should probably call it a day. So Ken. I got to tell you something. I was unaware of all the things you'd done before getting on the township committee. I knew you real well when you're on the township committee. One of the things, by the way, with Ken, I just want to say
he is a legend.
He is a legend. But with sometimes back in the day, as I would have a complaint and I would fire off emails to all the township committee members, and very rarely did I get a response other than thank you or no or go away. But Ken would always respond.
Yep.
He would always respond to, and we didn't know each other that well back then. But whatever the issue was, and even sometimes I might just write something back on the Maplewood Online days, and Ken would respond to that personally. I might be, why is this going on? And Ken would fire off an email. Here's why, Lee. So you really, the communication. I mean, that was I don't know if you're aware of just how that was a real strength of yours.
That is something that I think is the responsibility of those in power is to be responsive.
Right.
And if you're not responsive, you're not doing your job.
You're not.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing as I got in trouble, as a matter of fact, on the co-op board just recently, because I brought up a topic that we were not in agreement on, and I wanted to hear what our other shareholders thought about it.
Right.
So I brought it up in our shareholder meeting, and I was beat up so badly afterwards because they say, "Why did you bring this up?" I said, "Because I want to know what people think."
Yep.
An elevator ride with Ken is never just an elevator ride. You get an elevator pitch. You get an elevator pitch going up. Yeah.
I mean, what Ken is doing, he's espousing good government. Like,
Absolutely.
That's the way government is supposed to work.
100%. 100%. No, Maplewood legend, Ken Pettis. Right here.
Yeah, he is a legend.
Yep. So, Ian, anything else? Or
Nothing else. I know we're trying to keep to an hour.
we're trying to keep to an hour.
Yes.
Yeah, people say, I loved your podcast. It was an hour.
it was too long.
But an hour, 3 minutes. I missed the last 3 minutes. So they do that. They set it to their watch. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Ken Pettis again, former Maplewood mayor.
Thank you, Ken.
The great Ken
Thank you,
Pettis.
guys.
Ian Grodman, Lee Navin. We'll do it again soon. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.